Alerta de Rockstar.
Podríamos haber venido con chaquetita de cuero. Ya le he dicho a Nick que se pusiera una también. Pero sí, tremendo. Lo hemos leído. Lo leemos casi semana a semana también. Fuera, además de su libro que alguna vez ocupamos para hacer capítulos. Y Nick también es un animal. Podemos confirmar.
Nick Maggiulli, autor del libro Just Keep Buying, solo sigue comprando, me imagino, en español, que resume muchas de las mismas ideas que tenemos nosotros. De hecho, en nuestra misma filosofía, en las reglas del juego, tenemos un framework o una idea tomada prestada de Nick sobre cuándo preocuparse del ahorro, cuándo preocuparse de la inversión. Se lo comentamos también en la conversación. Y hoy día, Nick lanza su segundo libro, The Wealth Ladder, la escalera de la riqueza. Hablamos del libro. Yo no puedo esperar ahora que ya está disponible para comprarlo y para leerlo, porque me tinca mucho. Siento que tiene una edad parecida a nosotros, yo creo. Investiga mucho, le mete muchos números y ve las finanzas de una forma un poco más moderna, quizás de los típicos libros de finanzas personales.
Pero no lo compres, Pablito, porque ya compramos 10, que fue la
Uy,
manera que logramos tenerlo en el podcast. Tiró un LinkedIn, con Pablito estaba muy atento y estaba ofreciendo ahí algunos intercambios. Le dijimos, bueno, te compramos 10 libros, pero ven al podcast. Y cómo no, ponernos para que hiciéramos un tremendo capítulo para seguir reforzando estos temas, los temas realmente importantes. Me huele mucho a que su nuevo libro va a estar muy alineado con el Simple Path. Habrá que leerlo y quizás si quieres participar por un libro, déjate algún comentario en este capítulo o en el que esté en español. Lo vamos a subir en los dos idiomas para que los que prefieren el audio original lo puedan tener y para los que les cuesta un poco el inglés, no se pierdan absolutamente nada de estos grandes aprendizajes. Nick tiene su empresa de wealth management, le encanta escribir y se nota que es un apasionado por este tema de nuestro dinero.
sí, los escuchamos. Su feedback de cómo subir estos capítulos en inglés, que entendemos que es un problema el idioma, pero es demasiado valiosa esta gente. El traspaso, el doblaje al español no funciona tan bien como nos gustaría. Así que
Ya
vamos a
sabes,
tener este capítulo, ya sabes, en español. Lo vamos a tener en inglés, tanto en Spotify como en YouTube. Y en YouTube tiene la gracia que le pueden poner subtítulos. Yo creo que ese es mi formato recomendado, que se vayan a YouTube, pongan la versión en inglés, la pongan con subtítulos y disfruten de lo más cercano a la fuente de cómo piensa don Nick Maggiulli.
pero antes le quiero dar las gracias a la Universidad Autónoma. Igual como nosotros descubrimos en algún momento que tenemos que seguir cultivando nuestro intelecto, nuestra cabeza, este stock de conocimiento que se va depreciando, como nos decía Oscar Landerreche. Ellos lo tienen implementado con carreras online, con carreras presenciales, para que todos nos preguntemos por qué, para qué estamos haciendo lo que estamos haciendo y podamos seguir aprendiendo esas herramientas que nos van a ayudar a generar más ingresos en el futuro para que realmente podamos vivir tranquilos. Así que si los quieren conocer más, ingresen a admisión.uautonoma.cl.
Y hablamos también con Nick sobre la importancia de preocuparnos de nuestra jubilación. Él no era tan fanático de FIRE, dijo que era quizás un sacrificio demasiado grande, pero sí comparte que esa meta de la jubilación, de algún día dejar de trabajar, es inescapable y es clave. Y una forma de hacerlo, por lo menos en Chile, o la única forma que tenemos de hacerlo es mediante una FP, pero lo podemos hacer mejor, lo podemos hacer peor. Tenemos que cotizar, ojalá en el sistema formal y no de manera informal, cotizar más allá del mínimo si es que nosotros tenemos que pagar nuestro propio sueldo, aprovechar de cuando nos hacen regalos, en el caso de la APB, también podemos ocupar para metas de corto y mediano plazo, las cuentas 2. Hay todo un sistema que nos quiere apoyar, el seguro de invalidez y supervivencia, y eso es nuestra misión, informarnos, aprovecharlo, para que cuando llegue el momento de jubilar, lo vamos a hacer de una forma tranquila. Y una forma de hacerlo, tanto de meterse al sistema, pero también de aprender, es con AFP Cuprum, que nos apoya, que nos informa y esperemos que te pueda ayudar a ti también. Si quieres más información, cuprum.cl.
Vamos al capítulo directo a Nick Maggiulli. Bienvenidos,
Animals.
animales.
Nick, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me on.
We know a lot about you, but maybe some of the people that listen to us are not quite aware of your whole trajectory. We know you have a book coming out, which we will talk about a bit later. But can you tell us a bit of your history and where you are now?
Yeah, so I graduated from Stanford University in 2012. I started working at a litigation consulting firm where I kind of got good at data science. So I was doing a lot of analysis on, let's just say, litigation matters, and there's a lot of data using SAS, R, a bunch of different programming languages. But I realized that I really love personal finance and investing. I was like, oh, maybe I should start writing about it. So in 2017, I started blogging. I write one blog post a week, and I've been doing it ever since. It's been almost 9 years now. And in the course of writing on the internet, I eventually took enough of those blog posts and kind of put them together into my first book, which was Just Keep Buying, which is sold very well around the world, especially internationally. And now I have another book coming out in a few weeks, or by July 22nd, called The Wealth Ladder. And so that book is it's a different expansion on some of the ideas in Just Keep Buying, and we can definitely get into that. But that's kind of my history. I still have a full-time job. I'm still working. I left litigation consulting in 2018. I joined a wealth management firm, and I came in as a data scientist, but now I do operations. So I'm the chief operating officer at Ritholtz Wealth Management, and we just passed $6 billion in assets under management. So it's been fun to kind of see that. I joined when we had under $1 billion, so a lot of things have changed since then, but it's been really great.
And in the topics related to personal finance, can you tell us about how was the path, and maybe some things changed in this journey? Maybe when we start to talk about this, you think, okay, you have to go for your financial independence, but at some point you learn something different and you start to see the money from another perspective.
Yeah, so over time, my view of money's changed because I grew up, I would say, in the United States, lower middle class. Like, my parents technically declared bankruptcy 2 times before I was 18 years old. But despite that, we had family and friends and things, people we could rely on despite those, difficulties. So I never went hungry or anything like that, but money wasn't really, money was tight a lot. So going from that and then going to college, where my college was paid for, it was just a very generous, financial aid package from Stanford at the time. Like, they basically said I had no tuition. I just had to pay room and board for some of the years. Overall, that really helped a lot. And then just being exposed to different people from different backgrounds kind of changed how I viewed money and kind of just the social circles I was in. And then as I started working, saving money, I knew I wanted to do everything correctly out the gate. And I mostly did the right things. There were a few things I didn't do that were great, but for the most part, I made the right decisions. And I've just been trying to, figure out my philosophy and everything. And that's why I wrote Just Keep Buying, the first book, which was like, the continual purchase of a diverse set of income producing assets. That's the mantra I live by in terms of my investments. And so I'm doing that ever since. Of course, the investments come after, once you have the income and all that coming in. That's why I tell people to really focus on their income. And as that evolves, then you can do a lot more investing and focus on, how your money's allocated. But it's changed over time in that sense. And I look at it, when I was younger, I looked at it more as like a scarce resource. Now I look at it as more of like a tool. Like, you can use money to impact people's lives in a positive way, whether that's friends, family, etc. And so that's how I look at it now, is like, how can I impact, different people's lives with that money?
I feel like we're going to get found out in this episode because we tell our audience to focus on their income and do the comparison of compare what you can save in a year compared to 10% of your portfolio. Mm-hmm. Maybe that sounds familiar to you.
Yeah, but that's in the first chapter of
we stole that from Nick.
That's actually fine. That's great. I love it. I love the idea going out there because the summary of that idea is saving is for the poor, investing is for the rich. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest if you're poor. I think everyone should be investing, but it doesn't, as they say, move the needle. It doesn't make as much of an impact compared to, someone who's, has a lot of money already invested, right? And that comparison you use is a perfect example of that. And I want that idea to spread more, and I don't care how it gets out there.
Something that caught my attention on the blog of Dollars and Data, that's how we first got to read some of your thoughts. Reaching almost post by 500 probably. We are on episode 160 maybe. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting, the consistency. As you said, you never stopped doing it. Probably most of our audience wants to do something different, have tried, but then stopped. At what point did you see, okay, I'm going to keep doing this forever? And maybe in post 5, 10, 20, no one read your stuff, but then something changed probably. At what point?
It was late year 1, so I guess I would have been around post 45, 50, I got to meet, I was putting stuff out there every week. And the first year was the hardest, bar none, because no one, like, people think that when you write something that no one likes, like, or people don't like, they're going to come tell you. No, they just don't read it. Like, the true rejection is silence. It's not like, oh, your stuff sucks. Like, if people are telling your stuff sucks, at least they're still listening to it or reading it or whatever, right? When your stuff's actually like not well liked or anything, it's just silence. You don't hear anything. And so that first year, there was a lot of silence. I had a few moments where, people like some of my stuff. And so it kind of gave me motivation to keep going. But it was really a really long, path to get there. And by the end of the year, I got to meet Morgan Housel and a lot of people I looked up to who were really, great, financial superstars in terms of the writing space. And so they really motivated me. And then I got the new job at Ritholtz, and all that kind of just allowed me to keep going. And now I just keep doing it. I don't think I'm going to do it forever, but I want to keep doing it for the foreseeable future. Obviously, the model of online writing is changing. AI, now that more people are using AI instead of searching for answers, like a lot of the stuff I do, it's not that it's useless unless you're putting out a differentiated opinion. An AI can do a lot of this. If I'm just like, hey, tell me about like marginal tax rates, I don't need to tell you that. Like, yes, I could write a blog post, but like you can just search on AI or search and you'll find that. I'm not the person for that. But if you're like, hey, in the United States, like, why shouldn't you max out your 401k, or why should you not focus on cutting spending or something? That's a differentiated take that an AI is not going to be able to give you, because it's trained on all the takes out there that I don't necessarily agree with, right? So the only value I can add is my own differentiated opinion at this point, right? And so I'm realizing that I'm writing less and less pieces that are like, hey, here's this fact-based thing. Like, you can get an AI to do that. So because of that, I'm just like, hey, let's focus on the things that I believe are different and how you can change your thinking on that. And the Wealth Ladder, which is my new book, kind of gets into a lot of that, because it's not something an AI would have come up with. It's too like far removed from like the standard financial advice.
And from everything you have written, what learning surprised you the most?
I think the biggest takeaway after kind of going through all this is the importance of income and how much it's correlated with building wealth, or having net worth, assets, etc. And I always like had this feeling like, you hear like, oh, you can only cut your spending so much, but your income has no limit. You can just keep moving upward, right? It can keep growing. You have to consume something to live. Your spending can only go so low, right? That made sense to me, but once you look in the data, it's even stronger than that. And it's, as incomes go up, spending does tend to go up, but it goes up so much more slowly, and it rises so slowly as incomes keep ramping up. And so that gap there, what we call the delta, or just the gap between income and spending, as that gap grows, that allows you to save more, invest more, and then you have this flywheel that's just building wealth, right? Where your wealth is throwing off income, and then your income, you're saving more, and it starts growing really quickly. So the biggest takeaway there is just, it's the strongest relationship in all personal finance, the relationship between income and wealth. And so you have to focus on raising your income. And I know that's not easy. It's like, oh, I wish I had a magic wand and I could do that for everybody. But that is the differentiating factor between those who have wealth and those who don't. It's going to be income.
What do you need to learn in order to don't spend all that income? Because there's a lot of Ferraris, Rolex, and you have a lot of things to spend your money. Okay, you have to earn a lot of money, but you have to manage yourself.
Yeah, this is a great question, because how do you control your spending? Like, I don't have a great answer for that. I do have frameworks we can use and say, hey, logically, I've come up with something. Like, for example, in the Wealth Ladder, I say, hey, depending on which level of wealth, which is how much wealth you have, which range determines how much you can spend in different categories, right? So, we'll talk about the levels later, but basically, like, I'll say there's something called level 2, and level 2 is what I call grocery freedom. When you go to the grocery store, you can start spending more. Once I get to this amount of wealth, then I can start to, buy what I want at the grocery store. And then once I get to this amount of wealth, then I can buy what I want at a restaurant. And then once I get to this amount of wealth, then I can travel more often. I can stay in a nicer hotel, etc. Right? You can kind of keep seeing, as wealth grows, you kind of give yourself more freedom to spend, but you only do that after you've made the money and made the wealth, right? So you don't do it before. You don't do it based on your income. You do it based on your wealth. And I think that's a huge differentiating factor, because income is fickle. You could have a great year and then, you lose your job, something happens, you have a business, the business dries up, all sorts of bad things can happen, right? With wealth is a little more permanent. Of course, stock markets can crash, it can fluctuate as well, but in general, I would say wealth is the thing to focus on.
I like it. Going a bit back to income, do you have like an unconventional take about how to work on, where you talk a lot about human capital, work on your human capital? You can read, you can take courses, educate yourself. What would you say is important?
I think all of that's important. I think the thing to think about now is, okay, how is human capital going to change in a world where we have this assistant that can, summarize all of human knowledge for you basically at an instant? And that's what LLMs, AI. And I think that is going to disrupt a lot of industries. The question is when and how quickly and in what industries, etc. So the question is, what are the skills that you can do that will still be valuable in a world where we don't necessarily need someone to do research, right? Like, oh, write me a research report. Like, that's not going to be needed in the future. You can have an AI do that for you. But like, what is going to be needed? Sales. Like, I can't imagine a world where someone wants to buy a piece of real estate and they walk in and there's a robot realtor that's like, welcome to the house. It's just not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen. I don't imagine people taking 100% of their opinions from a AI doctor. I think they're going to want a human there. Maybe the human will use AI as well, and I think that's fine, but there's going to be assistance there. I think they can't use AI for the legal world. They're going to use it to summarize stuff and do all sorts of things, but you're not going to be like, okay, let the AI do it, because if the AI makes a mistake, at the end of the day, there's going to be a human there that's to review it. Because anyone who's used one of these, Chat GPT, et cetera, it has these things called hallucinations where it literally just, it's like a genius, but then it makes the silliest mistakes you've ever imagined. It's like, how would you not notice that? Like, or it'll make something up. It'll see something that's not there, right? And these are, no one can really explain why these happen. They're very, it's a very complex mathematics that leads to these things. But that's why you can't have it, completely in the legal world. Why lawyers are going to have to be around to check everything, right? And they're going to be paid. So there's going to be different skills out there, and that's just a sampling of them that are going to be valuable in the future. And figuring out what those are is not easy, but like looking into those and saying, hey, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. So I think sales is one. I think technical skills are still going to be incredibly important. So if you get more technical than most people, even if an AI can write code great, they're going to need someone to make sure it's right. And so there's going to have to be programmers out there. I know they think, oh, programming's dead. I don't agree with that. Like, I think maybe a very, very junior programmer is dead right now in terms of the job role. But in terms of the future of, programming, no, I think they'll still need programmers. I think credentialism matters. So lawyers, doctors, all those things we need a degree, those things are still going to be around. These changes take longer than people think. So in terms of raising your income, you got to focus on areas that are going to be valuable to people, that people are willing to pay for. And I think these are going to be some of those areas, especially in the United States.
What do you think about the role of AI in financial planning?
So there's three types of financial clients out there. There are those who want to do it themselves, right? They're called the DIYers. They just do everything themselves. There's the people who do most of it themselves, but they want to pay someone like almost on an hourly basis to kind of like check their work. Hey, does this make sense? And then there's the people that are called the delegators. They just want to like, hey, you deal with it. The delegators are going to keep using financial advisors. They're going to use humans. They're not going to hand it over to a robot. There might be a robot involved. There might be a LLM involved in terms of like helping with the software on the back end or presenting something, or you can ask it questions. It can do insights for you, but there's going to be a human there at the end of the day. So for those people, they're unchanged. For the people in the middle, the people who are like kind of like, hey, I need someone to check my work. Is this right? They might turn to an AI. It's possible, but would they pay for that? I'm not sure. I think they might still want to get an expert opinion. I think it's the do-it-yourselfers who are going to be like, hey, I'm willing to pay for an AI. I'm going to do it myself, but I'm willing to pay for an AI that looks at this thing and maybe can help me plan out my stuff. I think that's, if there's of those three segments, where is the financial planning industry going to be, quote, disrupted by AI? It's going to be with the do-it-yourselfers, because there are going to be tools out there that are very helpful, and they're not there yet, but eventually they'll be so good that I can be like, hey, here's my income, here's this, here's what I'm expecting. Like, let's create a plan for me right now. And it'll just plop out a plan, like just like that, right? And you can do that in software now, but you have to go and click and put in all this information. It's just, there's just so much more you have to do. You kind of have to build the plan, and it's a little bit more complex. In the future, someone's going to come out with something where you can just tell it a couple pieces of key information and it can create an initial plan, and then it'll be very easy to modify from there. I just don't think it's there yet, but that's how I see it being disrupted.
We have work to do, Francisco. We're getting into the financial planning space, and it makes sense. I also think the human aspect, like maybe people know how much they have, how much they spend. They have the numbers, but they need help with the conversations. Like, what is worth it to me? What do I really want to spend my money on? And that's where I see the AI maybe taking a bit longer, maybe it will do a good job. But for now, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's going to completely depend on the type of person. Once again, and this is from the Kitsy's data. It's roughly a third of people are delegators, the ones that just, hey, you guys do it for me. A third are, I can't remember the name for this one, but they're like check my work, and then a third are do-it-yourselfers, right? So it's roughly equal.
Maybe it's time to get into the wealth ladder. It sounds so interesting. Could you tell us a bit about the levels?
Yeah, so there's the wealth ladder is a framework that basically says that you should change your financial strategy as you build wealth. So as you kind of create more and more wealth, your financial strategy should shift a little bit as you move up different levels. There's 6 levels in total. These levels, I put them in US dollars to represent kind of US society, but I know we're going to do translated versions and the amounts will be different. So please do not stick to these amounts. These amounts are probably too high if I'm being honest, but the framework is what matters. So I'm going to give you everything in US dollars, but just think about the framework in terms of how this would apply to your local economy, right? So if I'm saying this not in the US, this is how it would work. But in the US, level 1 is less than $10,000 in US dollars. And that's net worth, by the way. So that's everything you own, all your assets minus all your liabilities. So all the cash in your bank account. If you have a car, if you have, a house, anything you own, that's your assets. Subtract any debt you have, mortgage, credit cards, student loans, etc. That's how you get your net worth. So level 1 is less than $10,000. Level 2 is $10,000 to $100,000. Level 3 is $100,000 to $1 million. Level 4 is $1 to $10 million. Level 5 is $10 to $100 million. And level 6 is over $100 million. Now, within U.S. society, around 20% of households are in level 1 or in that less than 10,000. Around 20% are in 10,000 to 100,000. That's kind of like the lower middle class. 40% in the US are 100,000 to a million. So that's your basic middle class in the United States. And then about 18% are 1 to 10 million. That's upper middle class in the US. And then the top 2% is, over $10 million. So for most of the discussion here, I'll be talking about level 3 and level 4. That's usually what I talk about within, the US, but I'm happy to talk more about any of the other levels. Like I talk about level 1, I talk about level 2 a lot as well. So that's kind of the high level thinking. And then with each level has different spending decisions, income decisions, investment decisions as you kind of move through them. And I'm doing this from a US context because it's what I know the best, but I know if we can lower these numbers to be something else and, it would still make sense.
Yeah, we can stay away from the numbers and talk about like the different decisions. I think that makes sense. But just one last thing on the numbers. It grows exponentially. Like each level is not a linear scale.
Mm-hmm.
Does that also maybe have to do with compound interest, how it works in your favor the more you have? Like it caught my attention.
Yeah, so every level is a 10x difference. And the reason for that is because I found that that's the amount you need to see a large lifestyle change. So like when I say level 2 is 10,000 to 100,000, let's say in the US, level 3 is, 100,000 to a million. Those people live very different lifestyles in general, right? So like there's a big jump there, right? And so you need a large jump. And, it's like, we were talking before the show, there's this idea of diminishing marginal utility, which is like this curve that basically says, the first $10,000 you get is incredibly impactful. The next 10,000 less so. And the next, if you give 10,000 to someone with $1 million, like they're not going to care all that much. You give $10,000 to someone with nothing, they're going to care a lot, right? So there's like money becomes less useful and it impacts your life less as you move up the wealth ladder. And so that's one of the key insights here. And that's true regardless of what, currency we use, et cetera. But that's the main takeaway here is like, hey, why is it exponential? Why is it growing by this logarithmic, 10x logarithmic scale? It's because, that's what we see, in the data. And also it makes sense from a more of a lifestyle perspective.
What do you think about the depth, the different levels? We were reading the Simple Path to Wealth of J.L. Collins. And I think that one of the biggest learnings over there was avoid the debt.
I think in level 1, debt is probably the most problematic of all the levels. It does show up in level 2 as well, but level 2 is more people who probably just have mortgage debt, or level 3, right? So for most people in like level 2 and level 3, the only kind of debt they tend to own is just mortgage debt, like they borrowed to buy a house, right? That's very natural. A little less so today with higher interest rates, but in level 1, like debt can be a huge problem because it depends what's the interest rate I'm paying on the debt, right? I think that's probably the most important thing, because if you're paying 10% or 20% interest rate, it's really, really tough to, get out of that hole because 20% is a lot. It just compounds very quickly, right? Like Warren Buffett was earning 20% a year as an investor. If you're paying that, like you're losing that 20% a year, right? So you're kind of doing the opposite of Warren Buffett in this case. So if Warren Buffett couldn't make money borrowing at 20% rates, you're not going to be able to, right? So it's one of those things where you have to just be very careful. And like my goal when I talk to people in level 1 is like, you're probably, you're probably in a tough situation. So you have to kind of go above and beyond to get out of it. And does that mean relying on friends, relying on family, like taking up extra work? Like do what you can to build some little base of safety. Because if you don't, and something bad happens to you, you can end up in a very difficult spot. And across the wealth ladder, I say something's amplified in every level. And level 1, it's bad luck. So something that's a normal, like I'll just give you an example in the United States. In the United States, let's say you own a car, your tire blows out. Okay, if you're in level 3 or level 4, it's annoying. You go, you pay to get it fixed. It gets fixed. You move on with your life. If you're in level 1 and you don't have the money to fix that, you could lose your job. You lose your job, you go into debt, right? You start going into debt. You can just see this downwards financial spiral that starts happening in your life, all because of some unfortunate event of a flat tire, And so that's what's happening, I think, in level 1. So when I'm trying to talk to people in level 1, I'm like, your life is exposed to bad luck in a way that other people higher on the wealth ladder, their life is not exposed to that same bad luck. So that's the thing I try and keep in mind. So it's like, what can we do to counteract that? And my solution is like, obviously, save up some money, have an emergency fund. In addition to that, do you have friends or family you could rely on in the event that something happens and you don't have an emergency fund, right? So it's like we talk about wealth just in terms of finance and money, but I think wealth is a much larger thing. And so you have to rely on what wealth you do have. If you have good family that can let you stay with them temporarily while you save up money, like I recommend doing that, like to get out of a difficult spot. Like you might need to ask for that help, and it can be tough to do that and have that hard conversation, but I'd rather you do that and then find a way to kind of get to a better spot, and then you can even help other people with that in the future. So that's the thinking I have when talking about level 1 and debt in particular.
What do you try to move to resonate on a psychological level, to try to move the people that are in that first level, in order to try to do the things better with their financial decisions? Because you can say, try to avoid debt, don't buy those things. Okay, the things that everybody talks, but how you really impact those people to change their behavior?
This is a great question. How do you get anyone to change their habits? Like it's a difficult question, right? I mean, there have been a lot of books written about this, a lot of research. How do you make people change things? At the end of the day, like they have to want to do it themselves. I could tell someone until I'm blue in the face, like, hey, do this, do this, do this. If they don't want to do it, it's not going to happen, right? So you can try and provide different examples or what could happen, or it's like, what type of life do they want for themselves? That's the question, right? What type of if they're stressed about money, like are they willing to go above and beyond to try and get out of that stress and get out of that cycle? And that's the question. It's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy to do that, but at the same time, like people are going to have to, if you have to want to, the pain of your current situation has to be bad enough that you can willingly go through the pain to get out of the situation, right? It's like, if you're okay, like, hey, this is not great, but I'd rather do this than all the pain of having to work more and save and all that stuff. If you don't want to deal with all that, then you'll just stay how you are. And that's how a lot of people are. They're content enough in their situation, and they will stay in that situation just indefinitely because they don't, know anything else. And so they will just stay living the way they're living because the alternative is too difficult. Going down the other path is too tough for them. So it's a great question. I don't have a great answer, but I think that's how I think about it.
I like the idea of being exposed to bad luck and maybe taking different roads, as you just said. I need your help on this part because in Chile, it's very common for people to invest in real estate, looking for that alternative path. And what I have seen in Chile, the last 5 years have not been great for real estate. Many people are in bad situations and they have had bad luck where the renter goes away or they have a problem with the kitchen. They have to put some more money. Help me convince those people that what are the risks of going through this maybe riskier path of going the real estate way. And now that you mentioned, it's like, yeah, you're exposing yourself to bad luck and maybe good luck if everything turns out well.
Yeah. So my thinking on this, and I don't know anything about these individuals' like financial profiles, but my guess is that the vast majority of their net worth is in that single property. Or
Yes.
if they have more than one, they might have two properties, etc. Right. But like they're over concentrated. Like this is no different than the business owner in the United States who's like, yeah, I'm worth $1 million on paper, but it's all in this business. I don't have any cash. I don't have anything on the outside that really. So they have a lot of risk. And so that's when I think about stuff like this, I just think about like, you're just concentrating the risk into one particular thing or one unit, you know? And so like, you know, they say real estate, everything's about location, location, location. And right. And so you could be in a certain area and maybe it's really popular now, but in the future it isn't. Maybe if it's a touristy area, fewer tourists come and then it's like, it's harder to rent it out or the economy turns and it's harder to do a lot of the things you used to do. So my only advice there, I mean, if you're already in the situation, there's not much you can do. Obviously, it's like you have to kind of just deal with what you have. But like before you go into that, think about the risk you're taking. Because yes, that is a way to build wealth. But once again, it's very concentrated. It's not diversified. It would be much better. And they don't really have something. I don't think Chile has something like this where you could buy like a REIT basically that owns a lot of different properties. So you're not exposed to just this one property that has this one problem, you know? And so my take on that, if you're in the United States, I'd be like, I'd rather you buy a REIT, you know, like that's a publicly traded REIT where you get real estate exposure and you're getting dividends from all the different tenants and everything. And you're exposed to real estate generally instead of just one unit. Now, while you can make a lot more money with one unit, you also can lose a lot more money. So all you're doing is it's just how diversified you are and how that impacts the risk. Right. And so what I think most people have done historically before we had diversified portfolios and all this, people just buy a property and then they have to just hope that that works out. And for some people it does. I bet you know people that it's worked out really well, and for others it hasn't. And so it's really about thinking about that risk when you make those decisions. And it's tough because like it's hard to predict the future. How do you know what's going to happen, right? Imagine you bought a restaurant in December, in the United States, even in December 2019. Oh, I'm going to open this restaurant and all this, and then COVID hits, and then you just can't predict the future. So the goal here is to like, don't get into that real estate stuff until it's a smaller percentage of your portfolio, or it's not all of your portfolio. Like if it was like 10 or 20%, that's one thing, or 30% even. But I think for most of these people, I'm guessing it's probably 80 or 90% of what they own is this one unit. And I think that's where the risk shows up.
What is riskier for you? Grab all your money and put it as a down payment for your own house, or decide to rent forever?
It depends on the interest rate and there's a lot of variables here. I wish one was always better than another, but it really depends. And because right now in the US, the 30-year mortgage rate is 7%. And that is, the highest it's been since the early 80s. As a result, renting is looking so much better. There's people out there, the rise of millionaire renters. And what do I mean by millionaire? I'm defining millionaire as people who make $1 million in income. That's not even wealth, that's income. They're making that every year. That is up over 200% in the last few years, which means there's people that make $1 million a year, making plenty of money. They could easily afford to buy something, but they're saying, you know what, this is too crazy. But whether it's prices, whether it's rates, whatever it is, and they're choosing to rent. So a lot of people are in that bucket where they're like, you know what, why would I buy, like here in Jersey City, I'll give you my example. Let's just say I get a $1 million property, that is not extravagant. You're thinking a mansion. No, this isn't a 2-bedroom apartment, right? This is not a mansion of any sort. This is a 2-bedroom apartment here in Jersey City, which is right next to, Manhattan and New York City. So $1 million just on property taxes. The property tax here in Jersey City is 2.2%. So just on property taxes, I'm paying $22,000 a year. So you divide that, you're paying almost $2,000 a year just on tax, just on property tax. That doesn't include any HOA. That doesn't include the actual mortgage payment. That doesn't include insurance, right? So you add all that up. Now it's going to be like $10,000 a month, which is a crazy amount of money to buy something. And I can rent the same unit for probably $5,000, So it's like, if the price is half, it's like, why would I go and buy it? So to answer your question, it really depends where rates are. It depends where prices are. It's a moving target. There's one is never going to always be better than the other. It's going to be dependent on like the local economic factors and kind of how everything's looking.
The thing is that it's not obvious that you have to buy a house to live. There's options. You have to crunch the numbers.
Exactly. You have to run the numbers.
Yeah, we've talked about the I think it's the 5% rule from Ben Felix when you contrast the renting versus what you mentioned, like taxes and reparations. It makes sense. And the opportunity cost of putting your money there.
Yeah, I didn't even get into that. That's a whole other, like, what if I took that extra money and invest it and all that? And that's a whole separate argument. But even putting that aside, like sometimes it's just clear as day. Like right now, I think it's a renter's market in the United States. I also think because they haven't built as much housing, I think they're going to start building more housing in more places. We saw this happen in Austin, Texas, where they added a lot of housing and the prices are coming down and rents are coming down. And obviously homeowners there are upset, but the renters love it. So I think the same things are going to eventually happen. They just have to fix what's called the zoning laws out here. So
one of the things that we say on our intros is that we're on the pursuit of exponential growth and financial tranquility. And reading your last blog post, you said financial independence is overrated. It's a goal that maybe it's not worth having, but you should pursue financial freedom. And if you exchange financial freedom with financial tranquility, I feel it's like the same thing that we believe. So could you tell us a bit about that post and what that philosophy is for you?
Yeah, so I think the idea with financial independence is like you need to get to financial independence as quickly as possible. And so that means, you don't go out, you don't hang out with friends, you save every dollar you can just so you could reach this arbitrary goal where you're like, hey, look, my spending's covered indefinitely because I have enough invested. Right? That's one way you can live life. And I don't necessarily agree with that because I think there's a lot more to do in life. And also it's like, you should just get to a spot where you can kind of choose what you want to do for work, but doesn't mean you can stop working. Right. I mean, I think that's a much better alternative. Like, hey, I need to work. Like I myself, unless I went and moved to a low cost of living area, I have to keep working. Right. I have to keep doing something, but I also enjoy working. I like putting out, I like writing things. I like blogging. I like, working in my wealth management firm that I work at. Right. So all these things I enjoy doing. And it's just about like, okay, get to a spot where you enjoy the stuff you do. And yeah, if you can make good money doing that, great. But you need to get to a place where you have that freedom to kind of do the things you want versus like, oh, I don't have to go and work a job where I'm working 60, 70 hours a week just to survive, And so I think too many people, especially in the US, prioritize just getting to a number as quickly as possible. And they don't think about the financial freedom, or as you would say, financial tranquility, where you can like, relax. It doesn't mean that you never have to work again. Doesn't mean you can just do nothing the rest of your life. You have to do something, but you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, what happens if I don't have this particular job? I can always, go and do something else and make money. I think that's where people need to get to. And that still takes time. That's not going to happen overnight. That'll take at least a decade to get there, I think, for most people. Some can do it quicker, but I think most people, it takes at least a decade of pretty hard work to get there. But once you're there, then you can kind of relax a little bit and not worry as much about trying to be financially independent or any of that stuff.
What is the portfolio that a person that wants financial freedom needs? What do you think about the role of fixed income, of crypto, of equity, in order to achieve a good return from your portfolio?
Yeah, so every country is going to be different in terms of what you're able to buy. Like some countries, it's easier to buy, global equities and others, et cetera. So I'm just assuming you have access to all these things, which you may not. It depends, right? So, but with that kind of put aside, I think my main, as I said, the mantra from Just Keep Buying was the continual purchase of a diverse set of income producing assets. So diverse set is one of them. So there needs to be a diverse mix. And then income producing assets, those are assets that generate income. So that's going to include equities, stocks. It's going to include bonds and fixed income. It's going to include real estate. And it really depends on what you like and what you prefer. And so some people really like the tangibility of real estate. It's a real thing. I can go and physically touch it, right? Other people, the problem with that, though, is it's usually less diversified. So I don't love that. But other people like stocks. They own a stock or they own an index fund and they just don't think about it. And it just pays them, every quarter. They get their payments, their dividends, etc. But But that's where I push toward. Does that mean I have no crypto? No, I own some crypto, but it's less than 5% of my portfolio. It's a small percentage only because it's very volatile. You have no idea where it's going to go. So many of these coins, it's too hard to predict the future. I remember back in 2017, 2018, everyone was saying, oh yeah, Bitcoin's great, but Ethereum is the one that everyone's going to run on. Everyone's going to have Ethereum. That was the consensus opinion. Every single person believed it, and it has underperformed Bitcoin by a wide margin, right? And then there's all the altcoins where you never know, like so many of these things go to zero. It's just gambling in some ways. So it's all over the place. So I'm not saying not to own those. I own some of them. I own some non-income producing assets, but they're like less than 5% of my portfolio. I would say at most 10 to 15% could be in, non-income producing. That includes gold, wine, art, crypto, all those things I put in non-income producing because there's no income. You're just buying it in the hopes that someone else is going to buy it for more, or that it's going to retain some sort of purchasing power. And that's fine, but keep that to a smaller percentage. The rest of it, the bulk of my portfolio is in income producing assets. And for me in particular, the bulk of it is in stocks, right? So it's in global stocks. It's roughly 50-50 between US and international. That includes developed market, emerging market. And then, yeah, that's the bulk of it. I do own some fixed income as well because I'm saving for a house. So I have some basically in like treasury bills, which is cash. I have nothing against owning those. I think you have to think about the risks of each one. And so U.S. debt is considered safer, but obviously the U.S. has a massive spending problem. So we're going to find out how safe it is for how long, and we don't know. But the bond market will react to those types of things. But I recommend having, other types of, global fixed income as well.
I feel personally attacked on the Ethereum thing. I bought it on 2017 and I was 100% sure it's going to do better than Bitcoin. Here we are.
I did too. I mean, a lot of people did. They're like, are you kidding? You can build on top. Like, it actually had more of a use case than Bitcoin. And so it made all logical sense that everyone's gonna be building on top of these things. And then it just didn't happen for one reason or another, which we could debate. But yeah.
Based on the other assets that you mentioned, I feel like we're in or maybe this is always true, but people are saying maybe a recession is around the corner, talk about the US debt, war. And I keep hearing people going back to maybe it's time to own gold, or what you mentioned as non-producing assets that could cover you in the event of financial disaster. Bringing it or tying it together with just keep buying. What would be your answer to those people saying like, I need to prepare for the worst? What's the price they're paying?
I mean, you can, but I wouldn't. Once again, I don't recommend more than a small percentage of your portfolio, right? I mean, if you are preparing for the worst, like at the end of the day, it's not like the only thing that's going to matter. Well, even gold and all that, and Bitcoin, like Bitcoin's not going to be worth anything in the apocalypse. Gold might be, but I don't think Bitcoin is, right? Because like computers won't be running, won't have networks. Like, I mean, it also depends what you mean by the apocalypse. We could get into a debate about that, but like at the end of the day, if something like that, some civilization ending event is occurring, your stocks and none of that's going to matter anyways. Like the only thing that's going to matter is like, do you have canned goods? Do you have some currency you can trade? Is that gold? I don't know. You might need weapons or guns. I mean, that sounds crazy, but like that's if we're talking about some sort of really bad scenario, I could imagine something like that. So really the things you're going to need is like medicine and canned goods. Like how much like is 5% of your portfolio in that? If you're really worried about something, you need to have that stuff, if I'm being honest. But once again, we're at what level are we talking about? Like 2008 was a terrible time for the world economies. It was terrible for the US and the world in general for most equities. But like, you didn't need guns or canned goods for that. But like, there's debates to be had about this.
When you develop portfolios for your clients, do you take in account the way that they earn their money, if they are entrepreneurs or they are doctors? How do you take that in account in order to develop a portfolio for them?
Yeah, you consider within like their whole risk profile. You think about how consistent is their income, how consistent, if they have a spouse, does the spouse earn income, how consistent is that income? You have to think about, okay, what are their goals? Like there's a lot of different things. I'm not just trying to like give you a non-answer, but I can't give an answer until I have all those things defined, right? Every person's different. Every person has different behavioral aspects. You have them take these risk tolerance surveys, and based on that survey, that informs us a lot about how they feel about risk. And our goal as a financial advisor, in addition to being a fiduciary and acting in our client's best interest, is to come up with a portfolio that fits them well and that they're going to stick with, right? We don't want to do something that's too risky and then they bail out. We don't want to do something that's doesn't have enough risk and then they can't make it to their goal. So we have to kind of balance that. And you're right, thinking about your human capital, like what are my skills and how should my portfolio maybe counteract that? And for example, if you work at a big tech company in the United States, you probably shouldn't have also all of your stock in just one or two of these tech stocks because now you're just concentrating. Don't get me wrong, that would have done quite well over the last 5 to 10 years, but you never know the future. It's always hard to know which tech company, how the future is going to play out. And so I think it's one of those things where you got to be very careful when you're thinking about your personal like job and your career and how your portfolio might need to shift with that.
Sadly, we don't have much more time left in the conversation. But before we go, I feel we have to ask about some book recommendations since, of course, Just Keep Buying and The Wealth Ladder will be there. But for what other books, it doesn't have to be finance related, but would you recommend to our audience?
So I'll do a quick financial one. So The Intelligent Asset Allocator by William Bernstein. Yep, Bernstein's one of my favorites in terms of thinking about that. If you want more personal finance, I like Get Good with Money, Tiffany Aliche. So it's not as investing heavy. It's more just budgeting, thinking about different ways to thinking about budgeting, debt, all those types of things. Non-financial, there's a great book called Deep Survival I enjoy. There's so many books out there. There's like literally so many that I need to like pinpoint like, if you gave me like, what's a great book on dating, I could tell you, or what's a great book on understanding biology. Like it really depends. So I'm not trying to not answer. There's a lot of good books out there and it's hard to pick just one. So, but those are a handful I've enjoyed.
Since we're talking about books, what do you think about the most famous book of personal finance, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad of Robert Kiyosaki?
I think my only issue with the book, I think it's a great book because it got a lot of people to think differently about personal finances. My only issue with how he frames it, he frames the poor dad as like, he's poor because he got an education and did all these things. And I don't think that's the reason that the dad is poor, right? It's not because yes, he didn't create a business and there is more upside potential in the business. I think we can all agree there. I think the issue is the poor dad didn't use his income to buy businesses, to buy income producing assets, right? It has nothing to do with the path he took. I think there's a lot of people that can have a normal job, normal career, have the poor dad path, but then use their money to invest in income producing assets and become more like the rich dad. Of course, they're not going to be as rich as the rich dad who went and started his own business and became super successful. But at the same time, they're not taking as much risk as the rich dad as well, because we talk about the rich dad as if, every person that starts a business gets rich. Like, that's not true. There's a lot of people that ended up in ruin. And I can give you stories. Like, there's this women's lingerie brand called Victoria's Secrets. I'm assuming, some of your listeners have heard about it. I don't know what it is in Chile, but there's probably something or they've heard of it. It's a major lingerie brand. The guy who founded that, sold it, in the 80s was worth a few $1 million, was very rich, incredibly rich. At the time in the 80s, a few $1 million is a lot of money, right? It's probably like 10 million today, right? And instead of just like, being happy and just doing that, he wanted to be even richer. So he founded another business that failed, tried another business, failed. Eventually the IRS, like basically, the United States Tax Authority said, hey, you owe us money, we're coming after you. And then he killed himself. It's a really unfortunate, really bad story. But that's an example where someone just didn't know where to stop and they kind of keep going after more. And, it can kind of get out of hand. But that's an example of like, people don't really realize like, when is enough? Where do they stop? And these are all these types of questions that I'm thinking through, that people need to think through a little bit more when they're doing this stuff.
Yeah. You could be a very successful poor dad if you do the right things.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a rich dad. He was following the rich dad path, but he ended up in even a worse example than the poor dad. So it's very easy to talk about the rich dad. You don't realize all the rich dads that never made it, right? So I do think there's a way to de-risk that. And that's like, you can follow the quote poor dad path, but still end up rich enough. Maybe not as rich as the rich dad, but still do quite well. And that's kind of my preferred choice. That's where Just Keep Buying falls in, etc. And so once again, this also goes back to the wealth ladder with levels, right? There's levels to this. I think Kiyosaki is basically saying you need to get to level 5 and 6. You need to have, in the US at least, you need to have $10 million in assets. You need to have really, really high level of wealth. And I'm saying I don't think that's necessary to live a good life. I think there's a simpler path that is off of that is less risky, and you can also do all the other things and do what you enjoy. You don't just have to become a business owner. So that's my counter to his Rich Dad, Poor Dad example.
Have you read The Missing Billionaires by, I think it's Victor Hagani?
I haven't read all of it, but I've read some of it. It was very technical. It was a pretty technical book. I think that they could have just framed it. I think they started the book a little too technically, and I think that book could have been much bigger if it had just been kind of framed a little bit differently. I think a lot of this stuff is just marketing, if I'm being honest, and how you frame the book, how you market it. And so to make it more appealing to people, I'm a pretty technical guy, and even for me, I'm like, yeah, this is getting a bit much for me, let alone someone. And I like this stuff. I study this stuff. I, do economics. I do financial modeling, all that stuff. And so for me, if it's a bit much, it's going to be even tougher for like a layman audience, a typical audience that's going to read this, right? So I think the structure of that book could have been done differently, but I like the concept a lot.
I like the idea that there were 4,000 millionaires that should be billionaires, but this time in history, and there are none. And that's because of the risk sizing. And going back to the L Brand's story or the Victoria's Secret story, the risk was too big. And as Morgan Housel says, the biggest goal is to have the goal stop moving. Just maybe as a closing up question and a final tip for our audience, what do you find yourself repeating the most when you go out to dinner parties and people keep saying, hey, Nick, since you work in finance, help me with my money?
Probably to diversify. I have so many people like trying to like, oh, I need to pick one stock or one crypto. Which coin should I get? And it's like, don't think of which coin you should get. Think about like which stock you should get. Like which stocks you should be thinking about this as a holistic thing. So I think the diversification piece, a lot of people say, oh, concentrate to get rich, diversify to stay rich. It's a great quote. It makes sense. It's technically correct, but it depends how rich. I think you can get wealthy enough being diversified. I've never had a real concentrated position in my life, and I've done fine building wealth. I mean, I'm not over $10 million in USD, but I've done quite fine for myself. And so I think the thing to think about is you don't have to take all that concentration risk to build wealth. It just depends how much wealth you're trying to build. That's the bigger question you have to ask yourself.
Nick will agree with us, Paulo, that you should put risk as the first thing in order to develop your allocation and not only return. Because if you do that way, you can lose everything. This is a game that you have to play for a lot of years, not just 1 or 2 very exciting years, because you're building wealth in order to live properly, be happy, and be really old and enjoy your grandkids. So that's the real game for us. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree completely. I think you have to think, there's this investment idea that, just survive. The most important thing is just surviving. And if you can just keep doing your thing for a very long time, you will outlive, however you want to call it, not live actually, but like your portfolio will outlive all the other portfolios that are messing around and chasing this and that. Like just keep following the path, diversified index portfolio, and you're going to beat most people over the long run. You just have to wait it out. So that's the truth.
Thank you, Nick, for everything. And everyone just buy the book as soon as it comes out. We'll be reading it probably for a book club. And yeah, once again, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.